Shalom Lacham, Ya'o Sha'al Rameh, Chazak Lacham Basham Ya'o Aleinu, Ya'o Ashar Achad. Za Ya'oda Bandor, Ret Mamazrach Ma'aretz Marachak, Eish Gatzatho. Hayom Hazah Anachno Nalamargal Ha'aretz Ashar Yathan Ya'o Lanu Cha Ashar Dabar. Ha'aretz Ashar Nashabai La'abatheno, Aretz Zabath Chalawa Dabash, Aretz Toba Wa Rachaba. Manachon Tamunat Adama La'aretz No. Za'ath HaSha'ala. Za'ath HaSha'ala. Virtually every map of the Holy Land from biblical times that you've ever seen was drawn up either by Christians or Jews, groups who say they believe the Bible, or by historians who do not believe the biblical record is a reliable and completely trustworthy account of past historical events. I will say now and without hesitation that none of these groups are qualified to draw up a map of the Holy Land, at least not one that only Middle Passage people should take seriously, for the simple reason that the biblical record is not really any of their business. They are not the bloodline, nor do they proclaim and give honor to the name of the deity who determined the boundaries of the Holy Land. He set the borders in place by the hand of his servant Masha ban Ramram in the 15th century BCE. The maps drawn up by said groups conflict in so many important details. These contradictions feed into baseless space cadet theories that the Holy Land is not located between Turkey and Egypt, but is somewhere in Africa or North America. What we are going to do in this video is establish with certainty the true location and borders of the Promised Land by looking at the words of the prophet Masha and not a popular translation of his words into another language made by Christians and Jews. I moved to this part of the world in 2006, so I'm going to be talking about places I have been and seen with my own eyes. After the nation of Ya'o was delivered from Mitzrayim in the first Exodus and crossed the Red Sea on a sheet of ice that was here 1 minute and gone the next, they marched north through the Sinai Peninsula, skirting the western coast of the Gulf of Aqaba, which is the eastern tongue of the Red Sea. They went up and around the northern end of the Gulf of Aqaba and set up camp on the eastern shore of the Red Sea. After this, they began their ascent up from the shoreline via a wadi to the mountainous region of northwest Arabia. The mountain of Alaim, Mount Sinai, mispronounced Mount Sinai, is not located in the Sinai Peninsula, nor is it located at Jebel al-Lawz in Arabia, which was announced by the late Ron Wyatt, a Seventh-day Adventist Christian. But we will deal with Mount Sinai in more detail at another time. From Mount Sinai, the people launched out and took the path through the great and terrible Paran wilderness northward to Kadash Barnea, mispronounced Kadesh Barnea, which is located in the wilderness of Tsan, mispronounced Zin, at the edge of the Paran wilderness. The true location of Kadash Barnea, despite every map you've seen, and the makers of these maps cannot seem to make up their minds, is not located southwest or directly south of the Dead Sea. It is located southeast of the Dead Sea. Kadash Barnea is the Ma'an oasis in modern Jordan. It is the oasis sitting at the beginning of the same treacherous road Muslim pilgrims used on their way to Mecca, many of whom died on the way and didn't reach their destination when traveling along the so-called Hajjaz route because they were unable to contend with the tough mountainous conditions. It was at Kadash Barnea that Masha sent out the 12 spies, one man from each tribe, excluding the tribe of Loe, to inspect the promised land. At the end of 40 days, they returned to Kadash Barnea, but 10 of the 12 spies brought up an evil report that the land could not be conquered because of the great walled cities and the number and the size of its inhabitants. This word put fear into the hearts of the people, and they rebelled against Yahweh and threatened to stone Masha, elect a new captain, and return to Mitzrayim. This rebellion cost them 40 years. A journey from Mitzrayim to the promised land that should only have taken some days would now take 40 years because they were punished and sentenced to remain in the wilderness until all that generation had died out. Their children would go into the promised land, not them. They were commanded to leave Kadash Barnea and turn and head down the way of the Red Sea. Decades was spent inching their way down this road until they reached the northern tip of the Red Sea. Then they were commanded to turn around and head back north to Kadash Barnea. When the congregation returned to Kadash Barnea from the Red Sea, it was the first month of the 40th year since the Exodus. Miriam, the sister of Masha and Aaron, died this month, and she was laid to rest at Kadash Barnea, where she remains until this day. Not long after this, Masha sent messengers from Kadash Barnea to the king of the Adomai, the so-called Edomites, asking for safe passage through his country along the king's highway. The request was denied. Then the whole congregation journeyed from Kadash Barnea westward to the area called Petra today, and Masha, Aaron, and Aaron's son Algazar all climbed up one of the tall mountains nearby called Har, and Aaron died and was buried there on the first day of the 5th month, 4 months after his sister had died at Kadash Barnea. Following a brief skirmish with the Canaanites, the congregation journeyed from Mount Har and began the lengthy trek to circumnavigate the territory of Edom, including the eastern border of Moab, until they reached the Zarad River in Moab and the Arnon River, which was Moab's northern border. The congregation was not allowed to venture into Moabite territory except for its border. They could only move along the outskirts of the country following the border lines. From the time of their first visit to Kadash Barnea until the time they reached and crossed the Zarad River was 38 years, according to Deuteronomy 2 and 14. After crossing the Zarad River, the congregation crossed the Arnon River and skirted the border of the Rammoneh, the so-called Ammonites. They followed the course of the Arnon River until it became the border between Moab and the land of Moab that was seized by the Amorites. The goal was to get to the alternate route of the King's Highway, which passed along the Dead Sea, because this road would bring them to the Yarden River, the so-called Jordan River, where they would then cross over into the Promised Land. After reaching the alternate route of the King's Highway, Masha sent messengers to the king of the Amorites requesting passage along the highway, and this request was not only denied, but the Amorites proceeded to wage war against the congregation. As a result, the people of Yahuah conquered and captured all of the land of the Amorites, from the Arnon River all the way up to Mount Hermon in the north. All of this territory on the eastern side of the Yarden River would be given to 2.5 tribes, the tribe of Gad, the tribe of Reuben, and half of the tribe of Manasseh. All of the details of the scripture we've gone over fit with this part of the world that you see on your screen and nowhere else. A plausible reconstruction cannot be made by assuming the promised land is in Utah or Tanzania or Peru or anywhere else for that matter. The reason these SpongeBob Cracker Jack in the Box theories get off the ground is because of the faulty maps made by Christians and Jews which fuel them. For example, virtually all Christians, Jews, and historians with axes to grind agree that the Wadi al-Hassan in Jordan is the biblical Zarad River. They agree that the Wadi Mujib is the biblical Arnon River, and they agree that the Zarqa River is the biblical Yabok River or Jabbok River. And all of this is wrong. According to the 1st century historian Josephus, the Moabite land that Yahushua initially captured from the Amorites resembled an island because it was surrounded on all sides by 3 rivers. I quote from Antiquities, Book 4, Chapter 5, and Section 2. Hereupon the Hebrews took possession of their land, which is a country situate between 3 rivers, and naturally resembled an island, the river Arnon being its southern, the river Yabok determining its northern side, which running into Yarden loses its own name and takes the other, while the Yarden itself runs along by it on its western coast. Now, that's what Josephus says, but if you look at a typical biblical map, and for this example, we will use the Thomas Nelson biblical map, and you see where it is putting the rivers Yabok, Arnon, and Zarad, there is not the resemblance of an island, which is a landmass surrounded by water, between the Yabok and the Arnon rivers. What Josephus described with his own eyes does not agree at all with this map. That's because the map is wrong. This error, which leads to the misidentification of nearly every locality in the Promised Land on Christian and Jewish maps, is the result of relying upon Christian sources such as the so-called Madaba map made in the 6th century AD during the Christian Byzantine period, and the church writer Eusebius from the 4th century AD. These sources are late and they are simply wrong. So now let's correct them. The Wadi al-Hassan is the biblical Arnon River. The Zarad River is the easternmost tributary of the Wadi al-Hassan. Its name in Arabic is the Wadi al-Sara. The congregation of Yahushua moved along the Arnon River until it reached the Zarad River and valley. When they crossed the Zarad, the next move was to cross the Arnon. Then they moved along the Arnon until they reached the King's Highway beside the Dead Sea. The Yabok River is the Wadi al-Karak, which begins near the Arnon and flows north and west towards the Yarden River. The Dead Sea on all Christian and Jewish maps is depicted as one body of water, when in fact it is 2 bodies of water, a northern bay and a southern bay divided by a small strip of the Yarden River. This area is all but dried up today and known as the Lysan Peninsula, but you can still make out the course of the Wadi al-Karak and see that it once flowed into the Yarden River, where the Yarden connected the 2 bays of the Dead Sea. The land situated between these 3 rivers is the island Josephus was talking about. It is the only possibility. This is the part of the land of Moab that was seized by the Amorites, and the nation of Yahushua took it from the Amorites. The children of Lot waited over 300 years before demanding its return, according to Judges 11 and 26. The fertile plains where the Yabok River, aka the Wadi al-Karak, leads, are the plains of Moab, where Moshe took the congregation after the victory over the 2 Amorite kings. Therefore, the city of Jericho cannot be located north of the Dead Sea, which is what all Christian and Jewish maps show. The true location of Jericho is between the northern and southern bays of the Dead Sea, not far from Masada. Can we prove that? Yes, we can. Adding fuel to the absurd Utah theory is the mountain of Nebo, where Moshe ascended to view the Promised Land the same day he died. The scripture in Deuteronomy 34 verses 1 to 3 clearly says the mountain was high enough for Moshe to see the southern end of the Jordan Valley. Yet the Christian and Jewish tradition identifies Mount Nebo with a mountain northeast of the Dead Sea's northern bay. This mountain has an elevation of 808 meters, 2,651 feet. The problem is that at this location you cannot fully see the southern end of the Jordan Valley. The view is limited. The reason is because there is a significantly higher mountain to the south which is blocking the view. That mountain is just northeast of the Lysan Peninsula, and it has an elevation of 970 meters, 3,182 feet. Only the view from this southern summit provides a panorama of the whole Promised Land to the north, west, and south. The mountain which Christian and Jewish tradition is calling Mount Nebo is clearly wrong. That means Tel es Sultan, which the whole world has been led to believe is the location of biblical Jericho since Charles Warren said so in 1868, is also wrong. Palestinian archaeology since the 19th century needs to be completely overhauled and rethought. It is based on flawed and utterly false premises. The Promised Land, your land, is divided into 4 sections or corners. Not only are the Christian and Jewish maps outlining the eastern corner of the land fundamentally flawed, so is every other corner of the land on their maps. We've already discussed the conquest of the eastern corner in detail. Now, the people are about to embark on a new phase of conquest when they cross the Yarden River between the 2 bays of the Dead Sea. The eastern corner was inherited by 2.5 tribes, Gad, Ra'oban, and half of the tribe of Manasseh. Now Moshe lays out the remaining 3 corners, which will be inherited by 9.5 tribes in Numbers chapter 34. He begins by delineating the southern corner. Wa yadabar Ya'o al-Mashallah Amar, so ath b'nei Ya'osha al-Amarta al-Ham, Che'atam ba'em al-Ha'aretz Chanain, Za'atha aretz ashata palacham banachala, aretz Chanain la gabalteha. Wahilacham pa'ath nagab mamadbar tsan ral yedei Adom. Wahilacham gabol nagab makatsayam hamalach kadama. Wanasablacham ha-gabol, managab lamayla racharabem, wagabar tsana, Wahe Thotsateo Managab la Kadash Barnai, Wayats Chatsa Adar, Wagabar Ratsamona, Wa Nasab Hagabo Ma Ratsamon Nachalamatsraim, Waheo Thotsateo Ha Yamah. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Command the children of Yahusha'al and say to them, that you, when you come into the land of Canaan, this is the land which shall fall to you in an inheritance, the land of Canaan for the borders of it. And the south corner will be to you from the wilderness of Tsan upon the sides of Edom. And the southern border will be to you from the end of the salt sea eastward. And the border will go around for you from the south to the scorpion ascent, and pass along to Tsan. And the going out of it will be from the south of Kadash Barnai. And it will go out to Chatzar Adar, and pass on to Ratsamon. And the border will go around from Ratsamon to the river of Matzraim, and the going out of it will be towards the sea. Numbers chapter 34, verses 1 to 5. The southern border line begins to be drawn from the wilderness of Tsan, just south of the land of Edom, which is where Kadash Barnai is located. The border goes around Edom and reaches the eastern side of the Dead Sea's southern bay. Then the borderline is reset at the wilderness of Tsan and drawn to the scorpion ascent. There are not 2 different wildernesses of Tsan. There is just one wilderness named Tsan, and this is the starting point of 2 borderlines heading in opposite directions. The first borderline starts out at Tsan and ends at the Dead Sea. The second borderline starts out at Tsan and ends at the Great Sea, the so-called Mediterranean Sea. First, it reaches from the wilderness of Tsan to the scorpion ascent. This natural landmark is one that can only be fully seen from a few hundred feet in the air, meaning that the people who gave it this name would never have had a way to see it in full. Unlike the Nazca lines in Peru, stretching across nearly 200 square miles of high arid plateau, this enormous scorpion in modern Jordan is not man-made, but the people on the ground in ancient times would have been able to detect it the same way Peruvian peoples were able to visualize and make their giant geoglyphs without ever seeing them in full from the sky high above. Once the borderline reaches the scorpion ascent, it turns around and comes back to the wilderness of Tsan to the south of Kadash Barnai. Then the borderline descends southward to Chatzar Adar. The clue to identifying this locality is its name, which means glorious enclosure. So we are talking about a magnificent fortress. The only logical locality south of Kadash Barnea that fits is the important pilgrim and caravan station stop after one leaves the Great Paran Wilderness. This can only be Tabuk, the oasis city in northwestern Saudi Arabia. At the center of the city is a glorious fortress which is built over a previous enclosure dating from ancient times. Hence the name Chatzar Adar. From Chatzar Adar, the borderline continues on to a place called Gat Samon. Most biblical maps make no attempt to pinpoint this place because the makers of these maps simply do not know where it is. But the clue is the name. Gat Samon comes from the word Gatsam, which means bone. Gat Samon therefore means bony, and thus it must be a place that is spectacular for its bony landscape. The only outstanding place south of Chatzar Adar that fits is the magnificent rocks of Boraika. These are the epic and awesome rock towers of Boraika, resembling jagged bones jutting out of the ground. The book of Yahushai, aka Joshua, chapter 15, mentions a place called Chatzaron, between Kadash Barnea and Chatzar Adar, which is abbreviated to just Adar in verse 3, and another place called Karkai, between Chatzar Adar and Gat Samon. Chatzaron and Karkai are the two station stops before and after Tabuk along the Hejaz route. From Gat Samon, the borderline makes a turn and heads to the river of Mitzrayim and the Great Sea. To do that, the border has to encompass the westernmost point of the Saudi Arabian mainland, known in Arabic as the Ras al-Sheikh Hamid, then cross the Tiran Straits, go around the southern tip of the Sinai Peninsula, and head north, hugging the western coast of the Gulf of Suez, and then north of the Gulf to the Pelusiac River, which is the easternmost branch of the Nile River among the 7 branches of the Nile River in the Nile Delta. From here, the border reaches the Great Sea, and a straight horizontal line can be drawn from this point back to the southern bay of the Dead Sea. This is the totality of the southern corner. Every single biblical map you've seen misrepresents these borders and shrinks the southern corner way, way down because the maps made by Christians, Jews, and scholars claiming to offer a disinterested and non-biased view butcher the details given by Masha in the Torah, and no two maps produced by them agree. We've just cleared things up once and for all, and it will be backed up by the prophet Yahuah, aka Ezekiel, when we discuss chapters 45 to 47 of his book. Wagabol Yam, Wahelacham Hayam Hagadol. Wagabol Za Ya'ilacham Gabol Yam. And the western border, it will be to you the Great Sea, and this border will be to you the border of the west. Numbers chapter 34 and verse 6. The western border is arguably the easiest of all the borderlines to delineate, and yet all of the biblical maps published in recent times still get it wrong. The correct border includes the entire eastern Mediterranean shoreline from the Pelusiac branch of the Nile River all the way northward along the coast until the Great Sea ends and turns into the small Gulf of Iskenderun in Turkey. I speak definitively because, as we will soon see, if the western border is shorter or longer than what was just described, it will throw off the detailed redistribution of the tribal territories of Yahushua according to the prophet Yahuah, aka Ezekiel, within the same boundaries of the promised land as defined by Masha in the Torah. Wa za ya'ilacham gabol tzapon. Man hayam hagadal, thatha'u lacham har ha-har. Ma har ha-har, thatha'u laba chamath. Waheo thotz'ath hagabal tzadada. Wa yatz hagabal tzaparana. Waheo thotzatheo chatzar renan. Za ya'ilacham gabol tzapon. Wa hatha oetham lacham lagabol kadama ma chatzar reinan shapama. And this will be to you the border of the north. From the great sea you will point out for you the mount of the mountain. From the mount of the mountain you will point out the entrance of Hamath, and the exits of the border, they will be to Tzadad. And the border will go out to Zaparan, and its goings out will be Chatzar Reinan. This will be to you the north border, and you will point yourselves out for you at the border eastward from Chatzar Reinan to Shapam. Numbers chapter 34, verses 7 through 10. The north corner begins at the point where the great sea of the west ends and turns into the Gulf of Iskenderun. The mountain of the mountain at this location is the imposing Eminus mountain range that terminates at the Mediterranean coast between the Gulf of Iskenderun and the Orontes River mouth. From the Eminus you draw a line eastward to the entrance of Hamath. This is the northern approach to Hamath near Aleppo, not the southern approach which lays between the Lebanon and the anti-Lebanon mountain ranges near Homs. The 12 spies went as far as the northernmost border of the Promised Land when Moshe sent them from Kadash Barnea, according to Numbers 13 and 21. They did not stop at the southern boundary of Hamath. All of the land of Hamath is part of the Promised Land. From the entrance of Hamath, the border line continues in a straight line eastward to what has to be the Euphrates River. If the biblical map you are using does not show the Euphrates River at the northern border of the Promised Land, your map is wrong, and it violates Genesis 15 and 18. Mashah writes, Wa heo totz'ath hagabal tzadada. The exits of the border, they will be to tzadad. The feminine noun totz'ath means exits in the plural. In other words, the borderline drawn from the Eminus and the entrance of Hamath has more than one exit before it reaches the place called Tzadad. This detail is not ambiguous so long as the northern borderline is drawn from the correct point, which is the Eminus. If it is drawn from any other point, the detail becomes nonsensical. The borderline reaches the Euphrates River, where the river is pinched and narrow, which is an ideal exit or crossing point. Travelers coming from the Mediterranean to the Euphrates by way of the entrance of Hamath would ford the river at this point instead of going further upstream to Carchemish. Once the Euphrates was forded at this location, travelers then went across to the Balik River and then down that river to its junction with the Euphrates. This is the second exit. The city called As Sadadain in Arabic on the banks of the Euphrates at this junction is the biblical Tzadad. The ancient name can still be discerned in the Arabic name. The road between these two exits, which makes a right turn at the Balik River, is the way of Chathalan mentioned by the prophet Yahuah, aka Ezekiel, in chapter 47, verse 15. The word Chathalan comes from the word Chafal, which means to swaddle, and is so named because the road enwraps the land at the western Euphrates River bend. The route did not pass directly down along the Euphrates riverbank towards Babylon because of the desert conditions which made it difficult to obtain supplies. The route via the Balik River, on the other hand, lies in a well-watered countryside and rich agricultural land that belongs to us. From Tzadad, the border goes out to Zaparan. The clue to identify this place is also its name. The word Zaparan means fragrant or aroma. The place called Al-Sukhna in Arabic was an important village for trade and commerce with springs and palm trees in the eastern Syrian desert. It is on the road of one going to Damascus from the Euphrates and vice versa. Its name in Arabic means the warm or the hot because of the hot sulfur springs in the village. The pungent sulfur smell often associated with hot springs does not exist at Al-Sukhna due to the rather benign geothermal system which does not create the pressures and heat for much reduction of sulfur into the rotten egg gas. On the contrary, the smell is pleasant, and this is the reason why people have bathed frequently in the hot springs at Al-Sukhna. From Zaparan, the border went out to Chatzar Reinan. This name means the enclosure of the spring or fountain. The place is called Bir al-Halba today in Arabic because of the well that has been dug there to enclose the spring. The location of Chatzar Reinan is fixed because it must lie directly across from Shapam at the same latitude. The word Shapam means something that is high and sticks out because it is exposed and laid bare. This is the strategically located rocky butte, which is an isolated hill with steep sides and a flat top overlooking the Mediterranean Sea at the middle of the Lebanese coast. The place is called Safra today, 29 kilometers north of Beirut. Wa Yerad Hagabal Ma Shapam Harabala Ma Kadam Larein Wa Yerad Hagabal Wa Macha Ra Chafap Yam Chanarath Kadama Wa Yerad Hagabol Hayardana Wa Hail Totsateo Yam Hamalach Za'ath Fa Elacham Haaretz Lagabaltheha Sabeb. And the border will descend from Shapam to the Rabalah, from the east side of Rein. And the border will descend and reach upon the shoulder piece of the Sea of the Harp eastward. And the border will descend to the Yarden, and the goings out of it shall be the Salt Sea. This will be for you the land for the borders of it all around. Numbers chapter 34, verses 11 and 12. The western corner is completed by drawing its eastern border line. From Shapam on the Lebanese coast, the borderline drops and descends to a place called the Rabalah, on the east side of Rein, which means fountain. Just like every other landmark we've seen, these two places cannot be obscure and difficult to pinpoint. That would defeat the whole purpose of the map outlined by Masha in Numbers chapter 34, which is to clarify the borders of our land. So where is the Rabalah and where is Rein? What modern European, American, and Israeli scholars universally accept as the biblical city of Dan is incorrect. The identification of Tel el-Kadi with the city of Dan rests solely on the speculations of the American naval officer William F. Lynch in 1849 and Edward Robinson, who agreed with Lynch 3 years later in 1851. No epigraphy, meaning no inscription, found at Tel el-Kadi identifies this place as the biblical location of Dan. Tel el-Kadi is the Rabalah of Numbers 34 and 11. The place name has a definite article prefix, so although it is a proper locative noun, it is descriptive of geography and not the proper name of a city. The Rabalah means the fertility, a fitting name for a place where melting snow from Mount Hermon to the north and east provides the majority of the water of the Yarden River, water that passes through the Rabalah, making the area highly fertile. The Rabalah is also situated on the east side of a fountain, which is the headwaters of the Yarden River. This is the Rein of Numbers 34 and 11. The border continues to drop from the Rabalah and descend because the topography gradually drops southward, which is why the Yarden River flows from north to south. The border follows the course of the Yarden River southward to the eastern side of the Sea of Chanarath, which means Sea of the Harp, the second lowest lake in the world after the Dead Sea, between 209 and 215 meters below sea level. The Yarden River flows through it from north to south until it reaches the Dead Sea with a surface of 430.5 meters below sea level, making its shores the lowest land-based elevation on Earth. If your Sea of the Harp is not shaped like a harp and does not have a harp's shoulder piece on the east side, and if your Jordan River does not flow from north to south through a freshwater lake shaped like a harp, and then down to a saltwater lake at a lower level than the freshwater lake shaped like a harp, then your proposed map of the Promised Land is wrong and must be rejected. This is the eastern border of the west corner, and this completes the borders of the Promised Land that the 9.5 tribes inherited after they crossed the Yarden River between the two bays of the Dead Sea. Every detail given in Numbers chapter 34 outlining the borders of the promised land have been fully accounted for. Every landmark has been identified beyond any doubt. The four corners of the land, beginning with the conquest of the east corner, have been clarified beyond contestation. The promised land stretches from the river of Mitzrayim to the great river, the river Euphrates, just as Yahweh said it does. The modern Jewish state of Israel created in 1948 is nowhere near this size, and it never will be. That's because the true bloodline has not yet returned to repossess their land. Most of our land is not occupied by the Israelis. Most of our land is occupied by the Arabs. Arabs in Syria, Arabs in Jordan, Arabs in Saudi Arabia, and Arabs in Egypt. The world will be turned upside down and on its head the day when the real tribes of Yahuah return to their land and hand all of these people in their land an eviction notice. That day is coming. According to the prophet Yahawah, that day is coming after the nation has exited the lands of pyramids in the Americas and congregated and restored itself in the second wilderness in the Far East. The borders of our land are not redrawn in the future. They remain the same as when Moshe first described them. What will change in the future is how the land is distributed and divided among the 12 tribes. Make no mistake, the land is going to be reconquered by the tribes of the true bloodline. They don't come back asking for a visa. They don't come back asking for refugee status. They don't come back asking to share the land. They don't come back asking for anything. They come back and take what belongs to them, and they will take it by force. The most important part of the land to be sectioned off at that time is the holy allotment unto Yahweh. Wa bahapelcham ath haaretz banachala taremo toromah leYahweh. Kadash man haaretz arach chamasha wagasharim alap arach. Warachab gashara alap. Kadash ho bachal gabol hasabib. Ya'e mazah al hakadash chamash ma'uth ba chamash ma'uth marabai sabib. Wa chamashem ama ma garash lo sabib. Waman ha mada hazaath. Thamod arach chamasha wagasharim alap. Wa rachab gasharath alapem. Wabo ya'e hamakdash kadash kadashem. Kadash man haaratz ho. Lachanem masharate hamakdash ya'e hakarabem lasharath ath ya'o. Wahe laham makom labathem wa makdash lamakdash. Wa chamasha wagasharim alap arach wagasharath alapem rachab. Wahe laloem masharate habeth laham la'achaza gasharim lashachaf. Wa'achazath ha'gher fatanu chamashat alapem rachab wa'arach chamasha wagasharim alap la'gamath faromath hakadash lachal beth Yahuah Ya'eh. And when you cause the land to be overthrown in an inheritance, you will donate an allotment unto Yahweh, set apart from the land, lengthwise 25,000 lengthwise, and breadth 10,000. It is set apart in all the borders of it all around. From this it will be to the temple 500 by 500 square all around, and 50 cubits for the open space to it all around. And from this measure you will measure lengthwise 25,000 and breadth 10,000. And in it will be the temple and the holy of holies. It is set apart from the land for the priests, the ones ministering the temple. And it will be the ones who approach to minister unto Yahweh. And it will be for them a place for their homes and a sanctuary for the temple. And 25,000 lengthwise and 10,000 broad. And it will be for the Loam, the ones ministering the house, for themselves, for a possession of 20 chambers. And a possession of the city will you appoint 5,000 broad, and lengthwise 25,000. Adjacent of the set apart allotment, it will be for all the house of Yahuah. Yahawah, chapter 45, verses 1 through 6. When the promised land is overthrown and retaken by the tribes of Yahuah, they are commanded to set aside a holy allotment of land unto Yahweh. This area will measure 25,000 kana by 25,000 kana square. A kana or reed is a measuring stick 6 cubits long. The small cubit is 42.288 centimeters. The standard or royal cubit is longer. This cubit is a cubit and a palm being the width of 4 fingers or 7.048 centimeters. The cubit Yahuah used is the standard or longer cubit measuring 49.336 centimeters. The kana or reed measuring stick is 6 of these cubits for 296 centimeters in length. This will be the area of the holy allotment unto Yahweh. Within this area are 3 separate districts. The first district is for the temple at the very center, and the priest will live in this district. It will measure 25,000 kana in length, north to south, and 10,000 kana in width, east to west. The temple area at the very center will be 500 by 500 kana square. Around the temple area is an open space 50 cubits wide on all 4 sides, east, west, north, and south. The second district to the west is for the Loam. These are the Levites who are not descendants of Tzadok, like the priests are who will live in the first district. The Loam district will also measure 25,000 kana in length by 10,000 kana in width. The third and final district will measure 25,000 kana in length, north to south, and 5,000 kana in width, east to west. At the center of this district will be the city, which will measure 4,500 kana by 4,500 kana square. Around the square city will be an open space 250 kana on all 4 sides, east, west, north, and south. A fourth district is mentioned in Yahuah chapter 48 and verse 18. This district will be outside of the holy allotment, but adjacent to it on the west side. It will be aligned on the same axis as the city and the temple, and it will have the same length north to south as the open space around the city. This district will be for food production, and it will measure 10,000 kana westward as one goes away from the holy allotment, and 10,000 kana eastward coming back. Now, I have been saying all throughout this video that every biblical map you've seen is wrong, and now I'm about to prove it definitively. Simply take this diagram that we have just sketched out using the dimensions given by the prophet Yahuah and superimpose it to scale over a map of the land so that the temple at the center of the first district is placed over what every single map you've seen is calling the location of biblical Jerusalem. Do you see a problem? You see it. I know you do. You can't miss it. A piece of the holy allotment is in the ocean, which simply cannot be. And virtually the entire area for food production is in the ocean too. What's the problem? The problem is biblical Jerusalem is not located where Christianity and Judaism has been saying it is for over 1,800 years. You're thinking, how could Christians get this wrong? How could Jews, of all people, get this wrong? It's impossible that they got this wrong. Well, they did. They got it wrong because this is not their land, and they don't know its correct geography. Simple as that. The Jews in the land are the descendants of converts, not the bloodline. The Arab Palestinians and the Israeli Jews have been fighting over land that belongs to neither of them, and the true people will contend with all of them for the land and win. The correct location of biblical Yerushalayim, aka Jerusalem, the city of Doeg, is Tel Arad. I did not learn this fact from anybody currently living in the Israeli city of Arad, and I've lived in the land only a few years less than the man in Arad who is broadcasting that Tel Arad is the true location of Zion. I learned it from Josephus, who writes that Jerusalem is not far from Masada. Modern Jerusalem is far from Masada. The only archaeological site that agrees with Josephus is Tel Arad. All of the costly Herodian masonry of the first century Jerusalem, destroyed by Titus in 70 AD, was reused in other buildings, especially by the Emperor Hadrian, who used them to build his city Aelia in 132 AD. Not one Herodian stone was left there. Only the ancient stones covered over by the Herodian stones, which were considered worthless for reusability by the Romans, were left behind. This is why modern Jerusalem in the north, which is really the Jerusalem of the Amorites, is confused with the biblical Jerusalem of the south, the Jerusalem of the Jebusites. When the true people return to their land and overthrow it by conquest, they will divide the country up into 13 slices, according to Yahweh chapter 48. 13 slices for 13 tribes. Each slice is 25,000 kana from north to south, just like the holy allotment is. But the slices will stretch the entire width of the promised land from the western border to the eastern border. Biblical maps that look like this one, which you can find on Wikipedia and in every published Bible atlas, with confused borderlines, uncertain localities, and where Numbers chapter 34 and Yahweh chapters 45 to 48 are set against each other and made to clash and contradict, throw them away. This is not an accurate map. This is an omelet. I know this video is not going to sit well with certain people. It will ruffle feathers. And it may be too early for me to pull up on my tribal land like I own the place. But this is how I feel knowing that Yahweh, the deity I serve, the deity of my forefathers, whose name I proclaim, from the far east where the sun rises, this is how I feel knowing that he is going to return every single square inch of the promised land to its rightful owners soon.